March 2005. A boardroom in Billund, Denmark, was filled with the smell of panic. The Lego Group, once the undisputed king of the toy chest, was hemorrhaging $300 million a year, its plastic bricks gathering dust as children migrated to the glowing screens of the PlayStation 2. The company was months away from total collapse, a victim of its own overexpansion into jewelry, clothes, and failed theme parks. In a desperate last-ditch effort to save the brand, they gambled their remaining prestige on a collaboration with a film franchise that many felt had already peaked. What followed wasn't just a hit game, it was the birth of a digital behemoth that would sell over 50 million copies and redefine how Hollywood interacted with Silicon Valley. But beneath the charming studs and slapstick humor lies a more calculated reality: the total commodification of play and the creation of a mechanical formula that would eventually entrap the industry in a loop of endless, repetitive nostalgia. This is the story of how LEGO Star Wars conquered the console and changed licensed gaming forever. To understand the magnitude of what happened in 2005, one must first look at the graveyard of licensed video games that preceded it. For decades, the relationship between movies and games was parasitic. Hollywood viewed games as mere merchandise, digital lunchboxes meant to be rushed to market to coincide with a film's premiere. The results were almost universally catastrophic, from the infamous E.T. on the Atari 2600 that nearly buried the entire industry in a desert landfill, to the glitchy, unplayable messes of the early 2000s like Cat in the Hat or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Licensed games were synonymous with shovelware. They were cynical cash grabs designed to trick parents into buying a product that barely functioned, let alone provided entertainment. At the same time, the LEGO Group was facing its own mortality. In 2003, the company was on the brink of bankruptcy.
They had lost touch with their core product, trying to innovate with strange pre-molded figures like Galador and Jack Stone that abandoned the very building blocks that made them famous. Their internal video game division, LEGO Media, was churning out titles that ranged from mediocre to forgettable. They were a legacy brand gasping for air in a digital world. Enter Traveller's Tales, a small British studio led by John Burton. They were handed a concept that sounded like a fever dream, a retelling of the Star Wars prequel trilogy using LEGO characters. On paper, it was a double risk. The prequels were divisive among fans, and LEGO was a failing brand. But Burton and his team saw something others didn't. They saw a way to bridge the gap between the tactile joy of physical play and the structured progression of a video game. When LEGO Star Wars, the video game, launched, it didn't just sell, it exploded. It tapped into a primal psychological trigger, the satisfaction of the click. Every time a character smashed a chair or an enemy droid, it disintegrated into tiny glowing plastic studs. The sound design, that rhythmic, percussive clinking, created a dopamine loop that rivaled the most addictive slot machines. It was the first time a licensed game didn't just feel like a movie tie-in, it felt like a toy box brought to life. But the real genius was in its accessibility. Before 2005, games were increasingly divided into casual and hardcore. Licensed games often tried to mimic the complexity of popular titles like God of War or Halo, failing miserably in the process. Traveller's Tales did the opposite. They removed the game over screen. If your character died, they simply exploded into pieces and reappeared a second later, minus a few points. This eliminated the frustration that had plagued children's gaming for decades. It allowed for drop-in, drop-out cooperative play, turning the living room into a shared space for parents and children.
However, the industry soon realized that this Lego formula was more than just a fun mechanic, it was a gold mine. The success of Star Wars triggered a corporate land grab. Suddenly, every major intellectual property in existence wanted the Lego treatment. In rapid succession, we saw Lego Indiana Jones, Lego Batman, Lego Harry Potter, and Lego Marvel superheroes. The industry shifted its entire philosophy on family gaming. The TT Games formula became the new blueprint: silent slapstick humor, a massive roster of unlockable characters, and an endless stream of collectibles that mandated multiple playthroughs. This is where the story takes a darker, more corporate turn. As the years progressed, the charm of the original games began to feel like the cold efficiency of an assembly line. The silent mimes of the early characters, who used pantomime to retell complex cinematic scenes with hilarious results, were eventually replaced by full voice acting. The creative limitation that had forced the developers to be clever was stripped away, replaced by the need to integrate with the massive multi-billion-dollar marketing machines of Disney and Warner Bros. By the 2010s, the Lego games had become a victim of their own success. They had pioneered the collect-a-thon genre so effectively that they became shackled to it. Every game followed the exact same beat: break objects, build a specific tool, unlock a character with a specific ability, and return to the level later to find a hidden brick. It was no longer about the joy of building, it was about the compulsion of completion. The game stopped being about the infinite possibilities of Lego bricks and started being about the finite checklist of a corporate brand. The impact on the wider gaming industry was equally profound and problematic. The success of Lego Star Wars proved that you could sell millions of copies of a game by leaning heavily on nostalgia and IP recognition rather than gameplay innovation.
It paved the way for the modern era of gaming, where the brand on the box is more important than the mechanics inside it. We see this today in the Fortnitification of the world, where every game is a platform for licensed skins and crossover events. Lego Star Wars was the patient zero for the idea that a game is not just a game, but a hub for corporate synergy. Furthermore, the safe nature of these games, the lack of failure, the guided paths, the glowing markers telling you exactly where to go, has been blamed by some critics for the softening of game design. We traded the challenge and the discovery of the unknown for the comfort of a guided tour through our favorite movies. The plasticity of the world meant that nothing had stakes. You couldn't lose, so you couldn't truly win. You could only consume. Yet, despite the cynical corporate machinery behind it, one cannot deny the sheer cultural weight of what Traveller's Tales achieved. They saved the Lego Group. Today, Lego is the largest toy company on the planet, with a valuation that eclipses its rivals combined. They are no longer just a brick company, they are a media empire. Their success in gaming led directly to the Lego Movie, a multi-billion-dollar film franchise that further blurred the lines between advertisement and entertainment. In 2022, the cycle reached its peak with the release of Lego Star Wars: The Skywalker Saga. It was a gargantuan project spanning all 9 main films, featuring hundreds of planets and thousands of collectibles. It was a technical marvel built on a brand new engine, and it sold over 3 million copies in its first 2 weeks. But the development of the game was reportedly marred by extensive crunch, with employees describing a culture of exhaustion and technical debt. The irony was palpable. A game about the joy of play was built on the backs of workers who were too tired to enjoy anything.
The legacy of Lego Star Wars is a double-edged sword. On one side, it is a triumph of design that brought families together and proved that licensed games could be high-quality, polished experiences. It injected humor and heart into franchises that often took themselves too seriously. On the other side, it signaled the end of gaming's Wild West era, replacing it with a standardized, risk-averse model that prioritizes brand safety over creative risk. We live in a world where the Legofication of culture is complete.
We see it in the way movies are structured like toy lines and the way video games are structured like shopping malls. The plastic studs we spent years collecting were never just digital currency, they were the building blocks of a new kind of capitalism. We were taught that as long as we kept clicking, as long as we kept building what we were told to build, we would be rewarded with a shiny gold brick and a sense of accomplishment. The original 2005 game was a miracle born of desperation. It was a spark of genuine creativity in a dying industry. But as that spark was fanned into a global wildfire, something was lost. The bricks became less about what you could make and more about what you could buy. The true Jedi meter was always full, but the experience began to feel increasingly empty. This is the story of how a toy company and a film studio built an empire of plastic. They didn't just change licensed games, they conquered the very idea of play itself. They turned the living room floor into a battlefield of brands and the controller into a tool for corporate loyalty. We are all living in the world Lego Star Wars built, a world that is colourful, charming and perfectly snapped together, but one where the instructions are no longer optional. This is the plastic truth behind the most successful collaboration in history. It saved a company, but it shackled an industry to the eternal clicking loop of the licensed IP. The studs are everywhere, but the imagination is sold separately.